on how you can call in tonight and get your questions answered live over the air. And also, I'm going to give you the phone number and the stream details because we do have a podcast as well. So that if you aren't able to listen to the entire show, or maybe you come in late or have to get out of your car, that's okay. You can always tune in later through our podcast platform. So let me give you the rundown on all of that. As you know, this is FLA Law Live on the Air. However, our streaming platforms right now are going to be on our law firm pages. So, of course, we are the personal injury attorneys of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes. So if you want to listen and watch live, we are in the studio right now, and you can tune in through Facebook if you have a Facebook account. That's going to be under Perenich, Caulfield, Avril, and Noyes Injury Lawyers. So if you tune in, you should be able to see the red circle around our firm logo on that page, which shows you that we are live right now in the studio. And also we are streaming live as well on our YouTube page. So if you have any questions or comments and would like to drop those in the comment section of either of those streaming platforms, you can do that. And tonight, myself, Jacqueline Bryan, and my co-host, Lori Robinson, will read those questions out. We'll have those read over the air, and we'll respond and give you some feedback. Of course, it's not limited to just questions. If you would like to comment on any things that we're talking about this evening, feel free to join into the conversation. We'd love to hear from you. The number to call into the studio is 727-441-3000. So if you do have a legal question and you want to call in and ask it live over the air, that's the best number to call, 727-441-3000. So hopefully you're all tuned in. I'm going to go ahead and share tonight's live to my friends on Facebook so that everybody can tune in. I encourage you all to do the same. Maybe you don't have a legal question right now, but you know some family members or friends who might. Then go ahead and share these live streams and broadcasts with everyone that you know. That way they can benefit from tonight's show. But as I said, we always come to you live Tuesday at 5 o'clock. So you can always tune back in later on another show, get your questions answered that way. But with that being said, I do want to highlight, I keep saying it, and I'm going to continue to say it as we go throughout the year, reminding everyone that we are celebrating our 70th anniversary. This is obviously a huge milestone for the firm, which was founded in 1955. And Guy Perenich, who was one of the original founders of the firm, started the firm 70 years ago and have been serving the Clearwater, Tampa Bay, immediate Pinellas County and Hillsborough County communities. And farther than that, obviously, our reach goes well across the state of Florida, helping those that have been hurt after injuries and accidents due to no fault of their own. And so it's obviously become a lot of our life's work. And I, of course, have the pleasure of doing this show tonight with my co-host, Lori Robinson, who hopefully you all know and are familiar with, but I will give her a chance to say hello. And then I also want to ask her about something that I keep doing, 70th anniversary memories, and just kind of strolling down memory lane, if you will. I know you have been with the firm for quite some time now, and sometimes it's good just to go back and reflect and think about the time that you've had with the firm and the people that you've helped, the cases that you've fought very hard for. And I'm sure the list is long if you sit down and actually think about it, right?
Yes, it is, actually. Yeah.
So tell us about that. I want to just take a brief moment to give a little bit of a 70th anniversary sharing session, if you will.
Absolutely. No, it's really remarkable, as we've shared before. And I know I've certainly commented that being a lawyer for many, many years, and actually in my 27th year of all things, I started in 1998 with the firm. It's really remarkable because it's quite unusual for law firms to have the kind of, I'm going to say, actually institutional history that our firm has.
You're absolutely right.
Guy Perenich founded the first actual specialty firm in the Tampa Bay area handling personal injury cases.
Mm-hmm.
And that's quite a distinction. And it's also, I think, a big part of why we've always had the focus to be specialists in the personal injury area. And of course, starting with the very foundation that Guy had firm has always operated kind of as almost like a family amongst each other, and we care about our clients, we care about each other, and that really makes a difference in how you feel when you go to work in the morning. So I did actually take a moment just to try to reflect back because it has been quite a few years. And the thing that was so exciting to me, actually, when I came to the firm in 1998, I was, pretty experienced. I had about 20 years, something in that ballpark, at that point. But it is very difficult to get jury trial experience.
Yeah.
Very, very difficult because, most cases do get resolved without having to go through a jury trial, but it is necessary to be able to go through a jury trial. And so one of the things that was quite exciting, and our firm has always been a leader in getting to trial when you need to get to trial, and we have that reputation. So,
absolutely.
So when I first started at the firm, I was really so fortunate to be involved in quite a number of trials in the first several years, which ended up leading to my being able to become board certified as a civil trial lawyer, and that's something that is a reflection of having demonstrated a certain level of trial experience and review by the bar and that sort of thing. Yeah, but
major accomplishment.
Yeah, and it's so exciting. It was as I was sharing off the record with you before we got started that what has happened over time is there are fewer and fewer cases that are tried to juries, and I even ran across an article going back to 2010 sharing how that has happened, that it's a small percentage of civil jury trials, and this is also true in the criminal area, that actually go to a jury. It's for disposition. A lot of reasons for that, probably expense and the time it takes to get to trial, that sort of thing. But that makes it all the more precious to be in an environment where you have the opportunity to get that experience. And so I was just thinking one of the ones that I would share, and I'd be many other opportunities as we go forward, sharing and celebrating the 70th anniversary to share others. But when I started with the firm, our partner, Brian Caulfield, had a case that I was able to become involved in just within a few months of starting with the firm. And it was one of those situations that happens where an insurance company totally undervalues the claim. And this was it was an automobile accident. It was kind of complicated scenario where our client had been struck by a vehicle that blew a stop sign. And then there was an added detail that it occurred near a commercial setting where a large moving van company had parked. And as I recall, I think it may have even been on the street, a large van that obstructed the view.
Right.
So insurance company thought our client, he had major pre-existing back issues.
Sure.
He went on to have a back surgery. So it was very significant damages. But the insurance company only thought it was worth $50,000.
Oh, wow.
After
a back surgery.
Right,
wow.
Right. And so it was very exciting, very tough fought trial. And at the end, it was a trial that resulted in a verdict of over $1 million.
Oh, wow.
So
wonderful,
it was,
wonderful story.
and very, very hard fought, and a case that you really, as a lawyer, you're hoping for the opportunity to go do battle on behalf of a deserving client. And obviously it's always very exciting to get a great result. The other one that I will share that we always talk about the importance of uninsured motorist coverage.
Oh, yes.
And so
I'm sure we'll talk about it again today.
And this was a case that, again, early in my time with the firm, and it was with Mark Perenich, our other partner. And this was a case where it was it would be what we would call a whiplash case. But of course, we know if you're in an automobile accident and you end up with chronic neck pain, calling it whiplash only describes what's actually occurred. It is a terribly debilitating injury.
It is very much
and so we had
and long lasting.
Very long. Many people, thank God, you can be in an accident and heal up, but many people do not have that experience. And in this case, our client, lovely woman, did not, and the insurance company. I guess I'll let them remain nameless, but anyway, they offered a very, very small, under $10,000 settlement.
Right.
Would not budge. And so we were forced into a trial, really, because you never know how those are going to go. The jury awarded, there were proposals for settlement, which are ways that if an insurance company fails to do the right thing, they can be made responsible for attorney's fees. And that occurred in that case. And so a case that they would have been able to settle probably for not a bunch more than what they offered, ended up resulting in an overall judgment against that insurance company of over $100,000.
Wow.
So as lawyers, we're always very happy about that.
That's when it's a good day, for sure.
And for very deserving people. Yeah. So we're in the trenches, and we're glad to be there.
Yeah, and I think I wanted to touch on a story, although it's quite a little different than what we're talking about now. But I was driving, where were we going? I think it was to Orlando, and I just kind of take a look at all the billboards.
Oh, yes.
as you're going by. And obviously I've been in this industry for about 13 years now. And so it's not surprising, that's just the world that we live in. But it does kind of give a little bit of a, I would say, a reputation to the industry. And it makes people think, oh my gosh, it's ambulance chasers, or, they're always putting the money on the billboards, or so-and-so got me this amount. And
it's always like millions and millions and millions.
Huge amounts, right? And it almost makes it seem like that's the focus of what we do. But I wanted to, before we kind of get into some of the questions and topics today, share one of the things that kind of stands out to me when I was fairly newer here at the firm and had no real previous experience with Social Security. I kind of started to learn it as I joined the firm, and had only had a few Social Security hearings under my belt. And most of the ones that I had so far, the judge, you have to wait for the opinion after a month to maybe even 3 months after the hearing. So it's like, you don't necessarily immediately know the result or the outcome. But I had this one case, and it was the first time where the judge actually let us know at the hearing what the results were going to be. And this is not $1 million case. These are not 6-7 figure outcomes, but the impact that it has for the individual who, a person who worked their whole lives and was able to be a breadwinner or bring in income for their family, and now they can't.
Right.
And this particular woman had been in housekeeping her entire life, and now she couldn't use her hands. She had a very severe medical condition that really caused her hands to be somewhat crippled.
Oh, gosh.
And she was devastated, and she was a mother, a single mother, and a teenager who was out of control, and she was just having a bad go at life at that time. And as the judge began to say the things and about the award and that he was going to grant the disability, I just remember her reaching over and putting her hand on my hand, and she started trembling, and she's like, is he saying what I think he's saying?
Oh, my goodness.
And I said, yes. And we just kind of waited, let the judge finish, and we got up and we went outside, and she just grabbed me and gave me the biggest hug. And I just thought, my goodness, it's not about the fees.
No, and
it's not about the fees.
That is such an important point, because one of the things, personal injury matters in Social Security as well. They're handled on, quote, a contingency fee. So that's set up as a percentage, because people could not possibly afford to pay a lawyer, on an hourly basis. It wouldn't happen. And so that does mean, in a slightly, the examples I just gave, those were, of course, substantial fees for the firm. Yeah. But the thing that is fantastic about what we do, and that's why we like doing it, is because the system is one that allows for everyone to have their case handled, represented by lawyers that are committed to them and that can make a difference in their lives. And I would say the vast majority of the cases that I work on a daily basis, probably is true for you as well, are actually, they're relatively smaller cases.
Right, you're absolutely right.
And they're every bit as important to us. And so people thinking about whether they have a case, they might even think, well, my matter's too small. Those lawyers wouldn't be interested in helping me. I wouldn't want to bother them. Totally wrong way to look at it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because we're here to assist people. And, frankly, the contingency system allows that to work very well.
Absolutely.
Very well, to be able to represent people. And the Social Security cases are so heartrending for the reasons you were expressing.
Very much so. And I'll never forget that moment. And she was just so ecstatic and so elated, and she was very much deserving of it. And
let me just say, which I know you know this, but it's like, Social Security is supposed to be a system that, in theory, a person could handle on their own.
Yeah.
When I started doing those cases maybe 20 some odd years ago, it's like, you got to be kidding me. It is so complicated, all the ins and outs. Yes. It's like, oh my goodness.
And then you're hearing terms and phrases and numbers and codes. You're like, what does that mean? An SVP of what? Yeah. So it's definitely not something that I can imagine, tackling, especially at a hearing level, on your own. So those are our 70th anniversary stories. I hope you enjoyed those. Like I said, I'm going to try to do that whenever I'm here and hosting, just to kind of go down memory lane a little bit, because we are excited and grateful to be celebrating our 70th year at Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes. So with that being said, let's jump into some questions on this topic tonight. And so everybody obviously knows that right now our phones are kind of the way that we gather a lot of our information intel nowadays. And I think that's true for most generations, young and old. And so what I wanted to do was another Google show. I think I did this with Brian Caulfield not that long ago, but I like to go on and see what people are asking Google when it comes to the topics that we talk about and the questions that come up, I guess, frequently. I'm not sure how their algorithm works, but I would imagine the most frequently asked questions are the ones that populate at the top. And so for people that are listening, and when you Google a question, a lot of times Google's will tell you people are also asking this question. And so it gives you an opportunity to kind of toggle down and see if there's any other topics that are related to it. And that's exactly what I did. I just kind of typed in, car accident and personal injury. And these are some of the questions that came up. So, Lori.
So what do we got?
Are you willing to tackle some of these?
We'll give it our best shot.
And keep in mind that obviously these are real questions. So they're not written by me. So obviously some of the phrasing of it might be quite a little bit different than what I might say, but this is what real people want to know. So one of the questions, and it came up kind of close to the top, was what do lawyers charge for their fees for a car accident or a personal injury?
There you go. And that kind of sort of segues from what we were just talking about, right? Because people don't realize often how that works. So you would be able to talk with a personal injury attorney on a consult basis with no fee whatsoever.
Exactly.
And if the attorney was to take your case, then all attorneys operate on the same basis. The Florida Bar has established the manner in which we can charge fees, and those fees are a percentage. And typically, although those can be negotiated based on particular circumstances, but generally speaking, what you're going to find with any firm is that you will be charged 1/3 of any settlement that is achieved if your case can be resolved without actually having to file a lawsuit and get into court. If it requires filing a lawsuit, then typically what the fee would be 40%. Which would kick in at the moment that the defense files an answer denying responsibility, and they always do.
Absolutely.
If they didn't, if they admitted liability, and you just argued about other things, then it would remain at the third. But as a practical matter, once you sue somebody, they get served. They turn their complaint over to their insurance company who hires them an attorney. So simple, but you owe absolutely no fee unless there's a financial recovery. If unfortunately it doesn't work out to be something where you get a financial recovery, then you don't owe the attorney any fee whatsoever.
Exactly right. And that is something that I think a lot of people get concerned about. They're like, well, what if there's no insurance on the other side? The person looked like they were maybe elderly, the vehicle was old, they hit me. I don't know if there's going to be any coverage. So maybe I shouldn't hire a lawyer. That's not true. I think that's the beauty of the way our fee structures work, is that we investigate the coverage, we investigate the insurance, we determine what's there and what may be there. Because there's coverages sometimes that are out there that people don't even realize are available to them. And so if you make that decision on your own, you could be walking away from an injury claim where you're hurt, you have medical bills, you don't quite know how they're supposed to be paid and who should be paying them. But you just make an assumption, and that could be wrong. But even if that were true, and there is no coverage, and there's nothing to go after, there is nothing that it's going to cost you to call a personal injury attorney and to investigate that. And that's the beauty of it. So if it turns out to be that way, and even if the attorney spent time and money and looking into it, investigating it, you won't get a bill. So that's the beauty of how things work. Now, I don't know if this Google person was asking from the plaintiff or personal injury side. I assume that they are. But if it were the other side, if you were at fault, then your insurance company
then you turn your lawsuit over to the insurance company, and they will take it from there. And then they pay the attorney.
They pay the attorney. So that's the beauty of that. So next question on our list, and again, I'm assuming they're kind of going in the order of popularity, but I don't quite know what Google's algorithm is. The question is, how much are most car accident settlements? So obviously this is something that is really on case-by-case basis.
Right.
But of course, this individual is likely trying to get a gauge or ballpark. And is that something you can really predict up front?
Not really, although there would be ranges of settlement based on categories of injuries.
Right.
So one of the things, obviously in Florida, which is what we're talking about,
right.
In Florida, if you are injured in an automobile accident, the first thing that has to be determined is whether or not you have sustained a permanent injury. And that will take some period of time because you have to treat, and obviously you hope you didn't, but I mean, if it typically is going to be a matter of several months and before you would know, and your doctors would know whether or not they can get you all better, or whether there's going to be some degree of residual injury, or there, whatever is involved there. And so with clients, you're not really going to be able to give any kind of an idea when the person walks in the door. It's not a question like, well, tell me what this is worth to me. It's not, It doesn't really work that way.
But I think a lot of people have that perception.
I think they do too. And that's probably created a lot by, these billboards that seem to turn it into something like that. Exactly. Like, oh, you're going to win the lottery. Well, no, actually I would certainly say what we shared before, the normal case, the more is going to be a more modest recovery because and actually you'd prefer to be in that situation because the ones with the very large recoveries are involved in a very, very severe injury.
Quite severe, right.
But there is, as you move through a litigation, or if you're able to settle a case prior to that, there is a lot of we have our own personal experience, particularly with automobile accidents where there are large numbers of cases that occur, insurance companies, and we have access as well to jury verdict reporters. So you can kind of get an idea of how juries tend to respond to particular types of facts. And from there, you can form an opinion of what you think might be possible. But again, it's not something, there's no book you go to.
Right. There's no calculator. And that kind of made me chuckle because I saw an advertisement like that for an attorney in Florida. And that was one of the things that they were promoting. I guess on their website, they had some sort of a calculator.
Oh my goodness.
And I thought, I almost went just to see
what it is, right?
What number, was it going to spit out a number at the end? I'm sure it probably said, call our office or something like right. After you put in all your information. Right. But yeah, I think that does unfortunately create this perception that when I go in, I tell you what happened to me, that you can ultimately tell me what my case is worth. But there's so many factors that go into
it's
that.
It's a very individual process, and you really actually, you want that individual process. Somebody that's giving a number that seems alluring to you is trying to bring you in the door. They're not talking about you personally at that point.
Exactly.
And what will you actually end up with? You with that lawyer, you may end up with a lot less than if you'd had somebody that was honest with you at the beginning and talked to you about your individual case and the factors that go into ultimately what might be possible to recover.
Sure. And a lot of people don't necessarily realize that it takes some level of longevity. Like you said, it could be several months before doctors can even render certain opinions in regards to the permanency of your injuries and things like that. And so at the initial intake of the consult, that's very, very hard to determine or assess without knowing, what the actual findings are of your injuries.
Of course, the individual, it's understandable. Going through the whole process, it's horrific. You're still probably under the shock of the accident and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so you think in terms of the outrage of the event in your life, but the actual basis for any ultimate settlement, if there's a settlement, or verdict, if there's a jury trial, is going to be based on what are your actual damages.
Right.
And that cannot be determined by one moment. You have to wait and see.
Exactly. I think there's a mediator, and I can't remember which one, but they always say your case is worth whatever the jury says it's worth.
Ultimately,
that's what your case is worth.
That's true. Right.
That's what your case is worth. So I didn't do this for all the Google questions, but I was curious, and I clicked on the Google answer for this particular question, and it gave an AI overview. So again, we're getting into the technology here, and I wanted to give you kind of a little bit of the overview of what AI came up with to see if you agree or disagree. But of course, they're very broad brushstrokes here. It says, car accident settlements amounts vary widely depending on the severity of the injuries, property damage, and other factors. Settlement amounts by injury severity could be minor injuries, typically 10 to 15,000. Moderate injuries, typically 50 to 250,000. Severe injuries, typically 100 to 1 million. Catastrophic injuries, 1 million or more. And so it doesn't tell us where it's getting these figures or ranges from. It doesn't define my minor, moderate, severe, catastrophic. But it does say that it depends, again, on the type of accident. Could be head-on collisions, rollovers, hit and runs, multi-vehicle accidents. And of course, liability is a factor, how much wage loss you have, and then pain and suffering as well.
Right.
So what do you think about that AI overview?
Yeah, I think it's so generic.
It is.
That, you could say,
can do more harm than good,
I think really, because it's not really telling you anything, because you don't know. In the first place, most people are going to interpret their own situation as not minor.
Sure. No one's going to say they have a minor injury, I don't think.
And it turns out that that's going to be, again, it's a very relative term, basically. So, and the individual insurance companies have different valuations in the way they look at things.
They do. And they have software and programs that kind of dictate how they value claims. And I was just talking to a client about that recently, how you could take an identical case with 3 different insurance carriers, and you're likely going to get hugely different offers from all 3. And they don't always have any rhyme or reason to it. And some of them are going to give you very precise numbers, like $4,750.92.
See that every so often. You
where
think,
does that come from?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, there's really not a book, like you said, or a calculator or a chart that you can go to and kind of graph it out. It's something that is very much on a case-by-case basis.
And that's an area where experience makes a huge
Very
difference.
much
So there are areas of the country, I think probably in the Northeast, I've heard it the most, but there's an old rule of thumb called 3 times your special damages.
Yeah.
I have no idea where the heck that ever came from, but every so often you'll hear that. I actually have not found that to be that much the case in our particular areas, although but I definitely have had that discussion. Yeah. And so special damages are your medical expenses, your true out-of-pocket expenses, and then maybe future medical expenses, wage loss, or things that are actually very specific. Right. But having said that, it's based on nothing.
Yeah.
It's absolutely, it's a rule of thumb
arbitrary
from different areas. Yeah. So we do find, like I found, I practiced in South Florida for many years before I came back here many years ago. The values, the settlement values were much higher.
Oh, yes.
In South Florida, much higher than our area. And I remember when I first came to Tampa, and I couldn't help but express myself. And after a while, you began to realize that people around here did not want to hear about it, because it didn't really matter. And of course, that's connected with the philosophy.
You're not in Kansas anymore, huh?
No, yeah, and that's connected with the philosophy here, but also more basically we have generally a more conservative jury than our people that would hear the cases tend to be a little bit less.
And even, I think, in Clearwater versus St. Pete, Largo versus, Largo, Clearwater,
or Pasco for sure,
Pasco or Hillsborough,
right?
Widely different jury pools,
right? So I mean, that's a part of, we have the right to a jury by our peers, which is a constitutional right, and a part of that is the idea that your community is more or less listening to the case and deciding it. Well, our communities differ in their outlook on things.
Absolutely do.
And so you see that. So, and people really don't realize that. And, and frankly, you wouldn't have any particular reason to think about it unless you were a lawyer that tried cases.
Exactly right. So before we take a commercial break, I'm actually going to move a question that was more to the bottom of the list up to this part because it kind of ties in. I think it's relevant. One of the questions that the Google searchers are asking is whether or not they are limited to the insurance policy limits after being injured. And so I think that kind of ties in because we're talking about settlement value and what the case is worth and how do we calculate that. And this person is asking, am I limited to just what the insurance limits are? And so I think that's a great question because, like you said, most people don't necessarily characterize themselves as having minor injuries a lot of the time. So, every now and then people do, but they might say, I have moderate, severe, or catastrophic injuries, but the limits are low. What's the answer for that?
And that's a very, very common situation that we find because even if the injury might be minor as the, quote, system would look at it, if you're experiencing it, it's not minor. I mean, it was enough to come to the lawyer, so it really isn't minor. But you... regardless of that, you just are you're dealing with the judicial system itself. So you are not limited to insurance coverage, except as a practical matter. In most instances, that's all you're going to be able to really collect. So what you have is a situation. If you have to bring a claim against somebody and you have to sue them, you sue that person or that company. If it's an individual. And that person has, let's just say they only have $10,000 insurance.
Right.
Well,
which is very common.
Very, very common. So in that scenario, as a practical matter, if it's a regular working person that doesn't have any large assets, then there's not, as a practical matter, any way to recover more than the insurance policy. And that's usually the case. And it's very hard for people to accept because they feel like the person should be held responsible for what they did,
extent,
and that's not untrue, but it's just, you just are in a practical situation where you can't expect to recover if the person doesn't have any assets that you really could get. I mean, basically. And so unless they're pretty wealthy, I mean, you're just, as a practical matter, very often going to be limited to the actual insurance coverage. And then ideally, you'll have that uninsured motorist coverage, so you're covered in that situation.
Exactly. We always bring it back to that. Because most people that are wealthy are going to have adequate insurance coverage. They're not going to carry small policy limits. And so when you encounter that, 9 times out of 10, as Lori mentioned, you are going to be limited to those policy limits. So how do you supplement that uninsured motorist coverage? So that was a good time to take a short commercial break. Of course, we're getting into some of these frequently asked questions on Google that people are searching in regards to personal injury and car accidents. And so we'll come back after the break asking Lori some more of these questions that are coming up popularly on Google. And we'll be back after this short commercial break. You're listening to FLA Law live on the radio.
This is the Tan Talk Radio Network.
After a car accident, there are many questions that you need answers to. Who pays for my car repairs? Who pays for the medical bills? What about my lost wages? And more. The personal injury law firm of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes has been answering these questions for their clients for nearly 70 years. Since 1955, they've been a voice of the injured in the legal system. As one of the longest established law firms in Tampa Bay, Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes is here to answer your questions. Listen to their live call-in radio show on this channel every Tuesday evening from 5 to 6 p.m. or call them at 727-796-8282 or visit them at voiceoftheinjured.com. Offices Clearwater, non-attorney spokesperson.
This is the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Welcome back. Hopefully you have been tuned in since 5 o'clock. You are listening to FLA Law live on the radio. This is your live legal call-in talk show brought to you by the personal injury attorneys of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes. My name is Jacqueline Bryant, and I'm here with my lovely co-host, board-certified trial lawyer, Lori Robinson, and she has been answering questions, and she and I have been talking about some of the questions that come up frequently. I guess they're very popular questions. When you search certain topics on Google, they'll bring these up that people are asking these questions. And so we pulled a couple of those just to kind of go over those tonight, because if people are asking them on Google, then it might be questions that you also have yourself. So we have just tackled a couple of them, but we have a few more to discuss. Of course, if you have a question of your own, maybe we haven't quite ask the question that you have a personal injury matter, maybe you've been in a car accident, trip and fall, work injury, and somehow you got hurt on the job, Social Security disability, some question that we just haven't got to yet, do not fret. Give us a call, 727-441-3000. The lines are open. And we're happy to answer that question for you live on the air. Of course, if you're a bit shy, you prefer to type out your question, don't want to call in, that's okay. We're streaming live on Facebook and YouTube right now at Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes Injury Lawyers. Search that. You should see our account and you see that we're live. Just drop a question in the comment section and we will read that out and answer it for you live over the air. Again, that call-in number is 441-3000. Get your call in before the end of the show. We'd be happy to talk to you. But going back to some of these Google questions, again, these are real questions from Google. It appear to be frequently asked when people are searching for, car accident lawyers or personal injury attorneys. And so the next question is about pain and suffering. So we kind of talked about settlement value a bit and how it's calculated. And of course, one of the factors or damages that go into the overall value is pain and suffering. So this person asked, how much is my pain and suffering worth? And then there was kind of like a subcategory about how is it calculated. So we can probably lump those two together. And so again, that kind of goes back to what we said. Are you able to determine how much someone's pain and suffering is worth initially? And if not, what do you need to know to kind of figure that out?
Right. So that is an intangible damage. And actually, if you go all the way to a jury trial, the actual legal jury instruction that's given to the jury says something to the effect of there's no precise way to calculate this.
Exactly right.
And so you're really looking at what those six people sitting on the jury think about it,
Right.
and how they negotiate between each other, because many people have great difficulty even thinking it's proper to put a value on it. Now you don't have that feeling if you've been the victim of an injury.
Right.
You're living it. Yeah. So it is an intangible, and there is no precise way for actually putting a number on it. Typically, what we will see is, you'll look at in a jury setting, usually for larger six-figure type responses by a jury, it's typically going to be something involving a surgery and what you would probably common sense would tell you. However, you don't know. Each case is very particular, but generally speaking, the larger amounts and will be related to that. The insurance company is really not very tuned into placing much value, if any,
At all.
on
At all.
on pain and suffering.
Especially pre-suit.
Oh yeah, I mean because it is intangible,
Mhm.
and they're really, probably one of the bigger challenges we'll have is depending on what the medical expenses are. But the person, well, let's take the example of the rather common injury of you've got chronic neck or back pain, a whiplash injury from a rear end collision.
Right.
If you have a permanent whiplash that doesn't go away after several months, and your doctor is saying, I'm sorry, but I think you're going to be living with a little bit of residual here. When I say a little bit of residual and something like that, it's a terrible injury. It's a terrible injury.
Absolutely.
I mean, it changes everything about your life.
Your day-to-day activities and just your daily living.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's the kind of situation, actually the case I shared about in the very beginning when we were celebrating 70 years, that was the problem. The insurance company wasn't going to put 2 cents on that, really, basically. And yet it was a real injury for our client. And in her particular case, the jury did respond to a pretty reasonable amount. But having said that, Matt always likes to joke about not joke, but I mean, there's nothing about the money. I mean, you could put it on the floor and roll into it. It will not make you feel better.
Right, it's not.
And honestly, I would say that it's rarely the case that someone could feel like it's even commensurate with what they experience. But you want to feel that you've been treated fairly in the context of the system, and it becomes, and that's a challenge for everybody. That's a part of why we try to guide people through the process and help them to understand it a little bit. But so the answer is in Florida, if you have a permanent injury, then you are entitled to recover.
That's the key.
You are entitled to recover for pain and suffering, but it is an intangible damage. So that will either be a negotiated amount in a settlement setting or a jury will make an award. Yeah. And, there's no precise way to know exactly what that number is likely to be.
Exactly. And again, there's no pain and suffering calculator.
No.
So you can't just put in the facts of the case and it'll spit out what your pain and suffering worth. It's just not like that, unfortunately. And there's all kinds of methods that can be used at trial. I mean, you can argue a per diem, type of an argument in terms of the attributing a number per day for the pain that's been experienced, or multipliers and different ways of doing it. But like you said, it's up to a jury to decide what they feel is fair, and we can as lawyers we can make recommendations, but ultimately they kind of negotiate it out and figure out what's fair. So my next question is surprising to me that it wasn't at the very top of the list, because I feel like we get this question quite often. And it's also, a lawyer answer, it depends. But how long do most car accident cases take?
Much longer than anybody could ever imagine.
Yeah.
It is so frustrating.
Much
to people.
longer than you would expect, that's for sure.
Yeah, because initially it does need to take a period of quite a few months. And there are situations, if you have a pretty significant injury and that insurance coverage is pretty low, then we can probably get that case settled. Right. Because the insurance company will quickly perceive that
the risk
of not getting the thing resolved. But in a situation where there is a reasonable amount of insurance coverage to hopefully allow for an award that would be commensurate with the damages, you have to treat to the point that you know what's going on. And of course, in a serious situation where you've ended up with an injury that may even require a surgery, cervical or back surgery, then you have to be very sure that you have taken into account what the damages are, because once you settle a case, that's it. Once you go to a jury trial and the jury makes an award, that's it. So you don't want to move too quickly if you really want to have a good handle on what is it you're looking at in terms of your medical situation. What are you likely to really need in the future? And so often, if a case settles before filing a lawsuit, perhaps you can get it settled within the year or 18 months or something. Once you get into court, they are trying to speed all that up. Now, it's an open question how well that will work. The courts are trying to get to a place where you get a case to trial in 18 months or so. That would
is certainly being pushed right now.
Yeah, so and I would have formerly said, you're looking at 2 years and perhaps even into the third year. Yeah. And I suspect that, depending on the case and the things that happen, that still may be true, but there is a big push to try to move things along more quickly, which obviously everybody would like to see that happen, actually. I mean, except maybe the insurance company. I mean, from our perspective, representing injured people, we want to get the case resolved and get them some money as soon as possible.
Absolutely.
The insurance company, on the other hand, would just as soon sit on it and continue to, make the interest or what have you, and wear people down, basically.
Right.
And it is a very frustrating process, because even if it is 18 months, which would be very quick if that happens, it's still a long time.
It is still quite a long time, especially for people that have had their lives
Oh,
upended.
my goodness, yes, right.
But like you said, I will credit some of the judges out there who are really trying to move these cases forward. I sat in on a case management docket the other day where it was multiple parties, and we're all getting our cases heard at the same time. So you're listening in when other people are getting their cases set for trial. And this particular judge was very adamant that he wants these cases off of his docket. He was going so far as to even having individuals reschedule their depositions, move that deposition date up before the mediation so that this trial does not have to move. And it was like, he was very specific. Like, I want you to move that date, schedule the deposition before that date. And they're like, well, Judge, that person's under a subpoena.
Right.
So, but yeah, they are trying to move these cases through the system. But again, it's still 18 months, and it's still likely that they'll take even longer than that.
Right,
so,
because it's very nice for the judge to have that viewpoint, but what ends up happening is you may not be able to get all those cases
it doesn't work.
tried. Yeah. Just there's going to be, so what happens if you're on a docket and there's only the week long docket, sometimes they're 2 week or whatever, but even though the number of jury trials is dramatically reduced, there still are a number of cases on any given docket. So,
I was surprised. I just went to a CLE recently, and 2 Clearwater judges were talking about this. And they said that they put up to 15 to 20 trials on one trial week. I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize it was that many.
Right.
And the oldest one goes first, and so if you have 15, 20 cases getting ready, and they're all ready to go to trial that week, that means about 14 to 19 are getting bumped.
Most will settle, but you can see that you very readily may not get, so say most of them settle, but there's 4 cases that need to go to trial. Well, you're not going to try 4 cases in a week.
Right.
You're maybe going to try, you possibly could try 2 short cases, but really you're looking at those cases then get passed over to the next docket or however they're going to do it, and then that disadvantages whoever's on that docket, and that carries on. So it's very, very common for cases to get carried over.
Quite the process.
So
it does require patience. But in these kinds of cases, it's best to let the cases mature and to build the evidence and allow your attorney to be able to gather the things that are needed to best present your case and your injury. Because a lot of people are just, this is what happened to me, and this is how, I think the case should be handled. But we need to build and mature that evidence.
And you could have, I'll never forget, many years ago, I had a mediation, lovely woman, an auto accident, and was a pretty significant automobile accident. She had a herniated disc. We're in the mediation, and her husband says to her, "Now tell Lori how you dropped things." And she goes, "Oh no, Well, she was having classic signs of the nerve injury from and so we had to impasse the mediation. And then she ultimately had a surgical consult, and she ultimately had a neck surgery. And thank goodness it was a very successful one. So the value of her case literally doubled. And it would have been tragic had she, and what she was doing was human. I would certainly do this if I wasn't a lawyer. I mean, I would minimize, oh no, I've got no problem.
Exactly right.
So it's
that was a wonderful example. You're absolutely right. We see that happen more often than you might realize. And they'll say, oh, well, it's kind of better. It comes and goes. And so they don't treat for it.
And right, exactly. And that's the other thing where it's, people will not really, and it's so important to pursue it, because otherwise, you're going to be down the road and has settled your case, like that woman could have, and had gotten a quote decent settlement, but not thinking that it was a case that would actually go on to surgery, and she would have had years later
ultimately would have had that surgery,
right? So it really is important to follow up with the medical care and to try to be, it's not like you have to be a whiner, but by the same token, you do need to be realistic because, like you said, the case does need to it needs to mature. We need to know, you need to know as the client what your situation is likely to be. And we can never know everything for sure, obviously, but you need to be at a place where you have a pretty good idea.
Absolutely. And I just had I feel like I just had a lot of these conversations recently, but a client whose father was saying the same thing. You're young. You need to get a better understanding of what's going on. Don't just, not go to the doctor. And I said, look, I agree with your dad. That's right. He's absolutely telling you the right thing to do because the pain that you're describing and the symptoms that you're describing are not something that you had before, and it doesn't come from any other source other than this that you've been able to testify to. So why not see the specialist and get the testing and do those things? So I think that's really important. I have one last question, but since we're kind of running out of time, but it kind of plays into what we just talked about. Somebody asked on Google, does having an MRI impact the outcome? I thought it was interesting.
If it shows something.
Very specific, yeah. And I thought, okay, well, that's a good question, actually. And so that I think that's right. That's right. It just depends on what the MRI shows, right? But would you, in cases, or do you see cases where the case can potentially have full value without an MRI?
It would depend really on the nature of the injury. Like the case I just described, she had a herniated disc. That was a fundamental part of her claim, basically, because it showed the severity of the injury. If you don't have those findings, that doesn't mean you don't have a case that has value. Right. But it may not be a case where an MRI will actually demonstrate that. So it's really kind of a medical decision. Right. What does the doctor feel like based on your symptomatology? You should have an MRI, and if they recommend that, you certainly should.
Right. Listen to your doctors.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's certain types of things that are indicators to a doctor as to whether or not it's something that would be needed.
Right. Exactly right. Well, we got through a good majority of them. There's a couple questions we didn't get to tonight, but that's okay. We have every Tuesday at 5:00 to go over some of these questions. And so we'll probably have another opportunity to ask some of those questions in another week. But as always, Lori, it was a pleasure having you.
Always happy to be here.
And of course, I hope you enjoyed the show and got some information from it. We are here every Tuesday at 5 with FLA Law live on the radio. Again, we're celebrating our 70th anniversary at Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next week.
WTAN, Clearwater.
FM 106.1.
WDCF, Dade City.
FM 102.3.
Listen.
This is CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by Progressive Insurance.
I'm Cammie McCormick. President Trump's tariffs on Mexico and Canada have set off a trade war, with Canada launching retaliatory tariffs. Prime Minister Trudeau.
We will not back down from a fight. Not when our country and the well-being of everyone in it is at stake.
He also warned it could get uglier.
To my fellow Canadians, I won't sugarcoat it. This is going to be tough.
In the U.S., too, correspondent Chris Mavridis in Toronto.
Ontario powers about 1.5 million homes and businesses in New York, Michigan, and Minnesota, but that could soon cost customers in those states a lot more. The province is threatening a 25% surcharge on that exported power if Donald Trump's tariffs drag on through the spring. And if that doesn't work, Ontario is warning the governors of those states it won't hesitate to shut off their power completely.
Americans could start to feel the impacts first from Mexico. CBS's Jill Schlesinger.
So much of our fruits and vegetables, they come from Mexico. I think that's where you start to see the prices jump pretty quickly with perishable items.
There was a hint today that things could get settled. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick on Fox Business said the president could work out a compromise with the other leaders.
Trying to figure out, is there a way in there that he can come in the middle where